the pretty much confirmation of fascism, there's reports that the U.S. military now is pushing to create an algorithm to snuff out quote-unquote fake news. Now, I'll just leave it at that's exactly who I want, determining what's fake news and what's not. We already have Google suppressing outlets like yours, mine, deranking independent, alternative, anti-war news. Obviously, YouTube is part of that. Facebook, and now the military. I'm sure you know a lot more about this than I. Your thoughts?
Well, they're just cutting out the middleman, right? The funny thing is that, you know, we talk a lot about the military-industrial complex, but under Trump, the military-industrial complex just directly rules us. There's no longer the pretense of having a middleman. So now we're just going to have the military monitor social media for so-called fake news. Are they going to censor fake news from the New York Times, like WMDs, like all of these lies, like the most recent lies against Iran, that Iran is supposedly attacking all these ships off of its own coast, and Iran attacked a Japanese oil tanker when the Prime Minister of Japan was visiting Iran for the first time in 40 years. We're supposed to believe this blatant fake news. But the military is, of course, not going to censor the actual fake news coming from CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. Instead, they're going to use this as a pretense, of course, an excuse to justify censoring alternative media and facts they don't like. We have a perfect example of this recently, of how ridiculous this so-called fact-checking industry is, the fake news obsession. The most recent example I can think of is Tulsi Gabbard in the Democratic presidential debate correctly stated that Donald Trump has been on the side of Al-Qaeda, supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria, which is true. The largest branch of Al-Qaeda since 9/11, the largest branch in 20 years of the so-called this fake war on terror, is located in Idlib, Syria. And the U.S. is protecting Idlib, preventing the Syrian government and Iran and Russia from retaking it for a variety of reasons. I mean, we can talk about that. But the point is that that was a factual statement. We also have mainstream media reports admitting that the U.S. government has been supporting Al-Qaeda, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, U.S. allies, have been supporting Al-Qaeda in Yemen against the Houthi movement in Yemen. These are mainstream media outlets admitting it, and Tulsi Gabbard correctly stated that, but all of these fake fact-checker websites said that Tulsi Gabbard was lying. They said that that's not true. So if they say that already, what do you think the military is going to say? Of course the military is going to say it's fake news, and they're going to censor it. The last thing I'll say here is that as scary as it is, actually, this is already kind of happening indirectly. That's why I said cutting out the middleman. So as an example, Google has been a military contractor since the beginning of its founding, right? Since its earliest days. And there's a really good journalist you should interview sometime, Yasha Levine, who's also really active on Twitter. And he's got an amazing book called Surveillance Valley, the secret military history of the internet. And he talks about how all these big tech companies, the reason they became these big monopolies is not because they were led by geniuses. No, they became these big tech monopolies because they had like a symbiotic relationship with the military-industrial complex and the government, and they got all these beefy contracts and were able to push out all the competition. So it's actually not surprising that they would go along with this. Facebook has already been working with groups like the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is a neoliberal pro-war think tank that is funded by the U.S. government and funded by NATO and funded by that beloved democracy, Saudi Arabia. And the Atlantic Council has been working with Facebook to screen so-called fake news, to censor out fake news from its algorithm. So this is just cutting out the middleman and just making what's already happening even worse.